So the next item on the agenda is a fireside chat on Usiru, the air pollution reduction by Crowdsourced uh, event that we are doing. I would request Meera K, Ashoka Fellow, Citizen Matters, Open City, Priya Chetty Rajagopal, Charter Member and Governing Board Member, Thai. Will you please have them on the stage? So you have the floor.
Working? Okay. Hi. Hi, everyone. Good to be here. So if any of you are wondering why non-techies like us are hanging around here at IoT, we'll tell you in the next few minutes, but we're concerned citizens, very excited about the subject we're going to be talking about. We've been given 3 minutes grace time, so that's good. So let me quickly introduce, Meera has been in the forefront of citizen, she's a techie actually, and been in the forefront of citizen movement, information and data for a very long time. I think we like to consider ourselves active citizens, and so here we are. What we're talking about right now should really affect every single person in the room. Because the air we breathe is something that we just don't think about till it's not there, right? So where I think the subject started to be of interest to people like us, and I'm sure to you, is when you understand how closely it comes to you, how closely it hits home. And for me, a friend of mine called Ravina Rajkoli set up a hashtag called My Right to Breathe, and it was a fantastic movement out of Delhi. We supported it during the Steel Flyover Beta movement, etc. But the fact that a newborn smokes an equivalent of 7 cigarettes a day in Delhi, really makes you think. At some point, you can keep air pollution, climate, the air we breathe at a distance. But when we talk about a baby smoking an equivalent of 7 cigarettes a day, I think let's all put it on the table that we are really concerned. Meera tells me that 12 lakh people die a year out of air pollution alone. And while we may or may not be in that statistic, being privileged as we are, I think it's critical that we start talking about it. And we also need to look at technology being at the forefront of enabling this kind of data. So I want to just jump into it, Meera, if I may. We can talk about data, we can talk about the issue, but let me ask you a simple question. We're talking about rich data, we're talking about air pollution, Project Usiru being such a definitive movement as far as technology and air pollution is concerned. So what's the big deal about measuring it all? What's this whole thing about measurement?
Right. I think as people from the IoT space or in general tech space, we are familiar with what you can't measure, you can't fix, right? So we understand the need for measurement. But something like this, which is a public health emergency, right? 1.2 million a year is like a huge number. Imagine if, we made a big issue about dengue and chikungunya, because everybody we know is getting affected. But something like this, right? Many of you have children, and it's kind of this breathing problems, and especially during winter, asthma, these are much more common. We kind of used to it, but we just don't link it to, Bangalore's air quality, right? 25% of children here in Bangalore have, much higher incidence of asthma now. So these are not issues we can just ignore. So to understand this, we need to measure what's really happening, the air quality. But it's not just about air quality, right? If you go to the AQI site, you have the Central Pollution Control Board data, which says, okay, this is the air quality at Silk Board, at Pina, at Outer Ring Road, and so on. But that's not the only thing to be measured. So they have around 20 odd sensors, around 10 of them are continuous monitoring stations. But there are other related factors. We need to understand what is causing air pollution. And fundamentally, in Bangalore, there are four main sources. Vehicular pollution, we know that. Dust, there's a bit of industrial pollution. And there is waste. Waste as in waste burning, as well as the emissions from landfills and all these piles of garbage we see lying around in the corner of a street, right? So these are the four main reasons. And how do you measure? So it's not just about like beyond air quality. So if you look at vehicular pollution, what are the other related parameters that we need to know about? We need to know like the density, vehicular density, which is passenger car unit. We need to know the quality of the roads, like what is the dust and the emissions are also related to the quality of roads, right? How many potholes are there? How many garbage piles are there? How many let's say, what are the PUC checks? How many vehicles actually have these PUC certificates? There's so many data points that need to be gathered to make sense of it all. We can't just go around and say, oh, AQI is bad. Today we don't go out or we wear a mask. No, that's not enough. To really start solving the problem, it's a larger space out there. We need to understand it much better.
So you're saying it's not just data, but the quality of data. And we need to understand
what parameters that kind of go into this space.
Yeah. So at the end of it, sometimes what we're given as citizens is very raw, broad parameters saying, okay, today we're at 500, which is hazardous. So we all get very stressed about that. But it is very much more complex. And I realized when we were talking earlier, if you look at the composition of the Air Quality Index or AQI, which I have to tell you that until a year or 2 years ago, I didn't know was an app on my phone. So, and the fact is today, whether it's Diwali or whether it's any other date, we are watching what's going on. And I want to quickly share, about last year, I still remember trying to track what's happening post, the festival and, the crackers, etc. And I found the biggest issue was in central Bangalore, at Cubbon Park. Can you imagine? Because that's where a lot of the burning was happening. And a little further down.
That's why they put the filter out there.
Meera and I were just giggling about the fact that the first large air filter in Bangalore was put in Cubbon Park. I mean, you'd think that the least place that needed filtering was Cubbon Park, but there it is. But I found BTM layout as an outlier. And I was thinking, BTM layout, why? And if I had just taken the data as it is, saying, for 5 or 6 days, I'm seeing this hazardous. So I was telling friends in BTM layout, I said, this is happening. And many of them just didn't know. When you correlated, I realized there was metro construction. There was also a road being widened or something. So there was a lot of dust and particulate matter. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm saying just the fact that it was something that would stop in a bit or something that we could be prepared for made a difference. But it was not just because of smoke. As people like me would look at the data as reasonably linear, and the complexity, the algorithms that are required to kind of cross-relate between the timings, the kind of pollution, or the kind of emitters. All these is what really helps us not just get the data, but to be able to influence and change. Because one of the things I feel very strongly about is it's all very well getting things in motion for making a difference and forgetting to make the difference. You talked about the Karnataka Air Pollution Board. So quality of data and why is it so relevant in a space like this at IoT Next?
So if you look at the Karnataka State Pollution Control Board, they have, like I said, about 24, 25 stations, and out of that I said 10 was continuous monitoring. In addition, you have many other private initiatives, right? You have the HEAL data, which is, they have around 30 odd stations, which are much lower quality. They're not the high-end stations that PCB has. There is also Purple Air, which I think is from C-Step. They also have some mid-range kind of sensors, monitors around the city. So between these, we have another 50 to 70 monitoring stations, right? And you actually can see these data. So if you go to the map and see it, and you can actually figure out which are the areas and which are really, really affected. Now, the government needs to kind of look at these additional data points and also look at collaboration. We really need to establish like the linkages between the source, right? Even now, after all these years, there's something called source apportionment studies, okay? Like, what really causes this pollution. We still cannot exactly say, oh, it is because of, 25% of this pollution is because of dust, another 50% is because of vehicles. No, we don't have that kind of understanding yet. There are still like statistical or estimates based on satellite data and so on. You can check out urbanemissions.info, that has some data. But we have like a very, very rudimentary understanding, I think, compared to, for example, last year, year and a half ago, Bangalore mayor and London mayor inked an MOU. Okay, this is part of the C40 group that was funded by Bloomberg, and so according to the MOU, both cities were to create a network of monitors. So London has done that. Earlier this year, they had set up like the largest network of monitors in the world, right? And we still are sitting at the MOU level. So I think it's important to figure out, like, we need to move beyond this, and see, data collection is not really difficult. There's enough technology here, enough techies in Bangalore. If we can't do it in Bangalore, where else
Where can
we
do it?
Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. No,
This is not like rocket science as much as the lack of will to get this done.
Yeah. So that brings up 2 points, Meera. One is, relating back to what you were saying, the fact is we always approach this from the point of view saying we need the data to be able to draw conclusions. We need data to make a difference and to change. Now, in the example that you've mentioned, where you have the largest network of monitors, and we are sitting on it. Now, this is the thing which I feel that people here in the room, we can only do so much, and we can create as much network and as many algorithms, and cross-reference the data and do the most wonderful things with it. But what are you going to do at the end of it? The only good news
We
which
should
I can
also ask Arvind, has his experience last 1 year working on Usiru, what
Yes.
really has happened in terms of trying to create more monitoring networks, as well as reaching to community to take actions and kind of learn the impact of different kind of interventions, what really can solve air pollution, right? Those kind of research and interventions are really, we just keep talking about it. I don't know if you've, sorry to interrupt, but this whole Bangalore Clean Air Plan, right? So every city in the world, so there is a national clean air program, and every city was supposed to come up with it. If you look at Karnataka's plan that our state government came up with, the KSPCB came up with, pretty much the 5, 6 cities, they're a copy-paste job. Okay, all of them sound very similar. And the points are really, we will build multi-level parking lots, we will build flyovers. Now, anybody with some understanding of urban planning and design will understand you need to focus on public transport, not encouraging private vehicular usage, right? So if those are kind of issues to, that understanding and basic vision for the city, where do we want to go and how do we want to tackle air pollution, I think is the challenge.
So we come back to the government.
Yeah.
So what is the government doing or not doing? I think if let me put this question right. What is the government not doing?
Okay. So this is again based on my observations in the last few years, both as somebody running a media organization as well as somebody active in the city. 2 things. One is information dissemination. This crowd here in this room, all of you may be aware of, there's something called AQI. What about the average person on the street, right? So there was this research, small kind of study done by a cardiologist in the Jayadeva Hospital, Dr. Rahul Patil, and he observed in 6 months, he found 1,000 people coming to him with heart problems and heart attacks of men under 40. Right? You kind of associate heart attacks with people at 60 or 60 plus, not under 40. And he then started figuring out, okay, something is really seriously wrong, and he started looking at their background. And then he found many of them were actually cab drivers and auto drivers. The exposure is so high that if you're talking about in a city of, I don't know how many, we have about 1 lakh auto drivers or cab drivers. Now within that, if you're saying 1,000 within 6 months in one hospital, something is going wrong somewhere. So this is something that we need to ensure that everybody knows, the larger public knows about, that there is a problem called air pollution, right? People sense it, but how do you deal with it? That the fact that you need to wear masks, that you don't go out, at least children don't go out during peak time. There's so many things that need to be done. Simple thing, like we all have apps and we look at the AQI levels, right? We're still not at Delhi levels that we look at it and decide to go out or not. We can't afford to do that yet. But what about people on the street? Why can't we have these public boards, signages saying, okay, this is air quality today. At Silk Board, imagine a dashboard saying like, this is the AQI, you know, have smiley face, red, green, yellow to show the quality of air today there. That level to reach out to the larger public, that is completely missing.
I hope somebody in the room actually sort of feels excited enough about this to be able to do something about it. Because, you know, it is these things, unless I know, I can't do anything. But the fact is, only a few entitled, privileged people have this information, and these people can get back into their air-conditioned cars, unfortunately. So we have to be a little more egalitarian on this. And I'm saying seriously, we were talking about this, Meera, that the people who are most impacted are the ones who may not know. And at the same time, I have a very strong belief that once you know, you cannot unknow. Today you know, I'm looking at Bangalore at 87, which is still good right now, and I'm saying we're human. That's good. But the fact is that it's not all over Bangalore, it's not all over the country. We are having pockets that are so heavily distressed. But the biggest thing, and I'm saying please visualize this little newborn child. We don't allow smoking in this room, but imagine a child smoking 7 cigarettes a day, a newborn child. I want you to stay with this because without that visual, we are not going to do anything about it. We're doing great things right now, and I love what Arvind has been doing with Project Usiru because that's a government and you know,
so that kind of research and collaboration is very, very
you need
important.
that.
Yeah.
And then you need to be able to have the change makers who will build on it and make sure it reaches and gets to do what it's supposed to. Because that's the other part of the government, right?
So there's a lot of skill and knowledge in the public spaces, in organizations, in corporates, in research institutions. I think that collaborative mindset is something that we really need to look at, right? Just like Usiru, like for example, BWSSB, another completely different example, but they don't have a hydrogeologist. How do you deal with a city's water, you know, you're in charge of supplying and distributing water, you're in charge of approving borewells and so many other things, you're in charge of treating sewage. Without a hydrogeologist and understanding what's below the ground in Bangalore, how can you perform your duties? So this sort of, I mean, again, similarly, PCB doesn't have enough scientific, you know, officers within, I mean, in terms of capacity building, in terms of the knowledge, in terms of the research work that needs to be done. I think all these organizations can start like pushing and encouraging this collaboration with government bodies, and I think that would have a lot of impact. I know of only one study. I think DST and Intel have a tie-up. They're doing this research project at IIT Bombay. I've heard of that, but in Bangalore, I don't know of any collaborations other than, of course, on the IoT side, ISC is doing a lot of work. But I'm saying on the health side, on the implications of air pollution is also something we need to start looking at.
Yes, thanks. 2 minutes and 50 seconds. So I want to come back to, when you said crowds and crowdsourcing, we talked about the crowds are the ones that are most impacted. And yet, if you look at the fact that community involvement and crowdsourcing is so critical, there are gaps there. While there may be gaps, I want to understand from you, what do we need to do to be able to fix it tomorrow morning? Big ask, but yeah, let's talk about it. What the heck?
No, I think it's a very important point because this crowd here has the capacity, and this is something, and I, as a citizen, as somebody from the tech space, in fact, I worked on IoT before the word became popular. We used to call it M2M and moats and all that. But it's really, you know, very doable to create these knowledge bases, to create this better understanding of city systems through data, right? Create sensors to measure passenger car units at a particular point, or analyze bus routes to figure out which are the gaps or which are the black spots which are not served by public transportation. So many of these things are very, very doable. Maybe, you know, TAI can organize a the data jam, I'm happy to come there and we can start looking at what is available, what needs to be measured, and what can we do with that, and how do we go to the government and say, hey, here's a analysis and here's some knowledge that we have gained, and please use this to, you know, decide. So you need to have these kind of data-based decision making in public spaces. So that is one side from a crowdsourcing, but also as active citizens, like you said, there's a moral obligation if we can all not just make changes in our own lives, right, to avoid plastic or to use public transportation, but also to ask and demand of our elected reps saying, you know, why are you not looking at more research? Why are you not doing better information dissemination? To demand more from our governments and our MLAs and MPs. I think that's also important to look at.
I'll give you a small example of where I think we can do this, a very, very small example. I've asked my corporator in my ward, which is 93, to say, hey, listen, can you just get a bus shuttle between Prestige, Mount Carmel's to the metro station? It's such a simple thing, but just look at the amount of transport it takes off. We'll end here because I know there's a lot of a lot of stuff that we can talk, and there's more sessions, and there's tea, which, by the way, we are also very excited about. But thank you for being a great audience, and Meera, thank you so much for the insights. I enjoyed this. But when we leave the room, please just, we know, let's not unknow, right? Please remember that little child who has no hope in the next generation unless we get involved with technology, with hope, with a doability, and with some commitment.
Thank you very much.